Good.
You want to kick it off?
All right. So I'll kick it off. Yeah. So it's lovely to see you, Bogumil. And since we last spoke, because we spoke once before, which was mostly me talking, and I'm going to do less talking this time because I want to hear much, much more from you. But since that last time, yeah, we met up in Closters at Guy Spears ValueX conference, which was wonderful. So it was very nice to meet you and your wife, and I don't know, the 110, 120 other people that were there. It was a great few days.
It was a very special event, and it's always a highlight of my year. And this year, my wife came, and she went skiing when I was at the event, spending time with everybody. But you know, it's a conversation that comes up in this podcast a lot about having a network or your tribe
Mm.
in the industry or in general in life, professionally speaking and personally speaking. And I feel like ValueX has been that for me. All the wonderful people I met that come from a variety of, obviously different parts of the world, but also different fields with some overlap. And just that time that we can spend together and just talk and get to know other perspectives. It's always a highlight of my year. But you and I think I discovered you through Guy Spear. He brought up your book in one of the posts, and
Did he?
I think so. That's how
Oh,
very first time I heard about you. And then
good.
we connected, and we actually recorded the episode on
Mm.
Talking Billions with you before we met in Clusters.
That's right.
So Clusters followed, and I got to see you in person, which was fun. But I was looking
Mm.
forward to this conversation because you come from a different part of the universe, yet overlapping with mine. You are around new business ventures, venture capital. You're an angel investor. And you have a different perspective because you meet a lot of companies at an earlier stage than I do in the public markets. By the time I see them, they're well established,
Mm.
proven. And you see that stage when things are still being tested, there are pivots happening. So it's fascinating to learn from you and hear your perspective as well.
Well, it was good, and I mean, the Value X that guy's created there. I mean, it's an extension of his generous, nice, just lovely personality. And I've met up with a few people since in London, and just this week, in fact, met up with one person, and a bunch of us went for dinner a couple of weeks ago. So it's been great, and I think because of how Guy is, that obviously comes through in the conference. So then and I've seen this at my own events and such like as well, and other events. Um, People behave and are in a way that fits the conference and fits Guy and fits that. So you generally get nice people being even nicer because
Hmm.
Guy's so nice. So yeah, it was really really good to do. And I'm looking forward to quizzing you a bit on this one because I remember, I don't know, you didn't mention it, but I remember us having a bit of a DM back and forth, and I wanted to know more about you, which was my suggestion, or I was just curious about it, like to find it. And you said, okay, well, why not have a call and record it a bit, and help your Talking Billions listener hear more about you and your background, because you fleetingly sometimes mention on conversations that you have about growing up in Poland, I think it is. You've obviously got a
Yes.
reasonably unusual name, and then I was listening to the one this week, your chat with Devon, which was terrific. I learned a lot from that, and I'm sure you were saying something about being educated in France.
That's
Is that
true.
right? And then there was
Yeah.
something. So okay, there's three things. There's like grown up in Poland, educated in France, and there was something you mentioned, right? I don't know if this is uncomfortable for you. Is this uncomfortable
Tell me.
being quizzed a bit?
No, no, I love it. I love it. I
Okay,
love
good, good, good.
it.
Well, please you know
uh,
let your listeners hear what's going to go on. And then there was something about you were the only person who was not from France doing something at that
that's
French
right.
university or
Oh
something like that.
wow.
But I can't remember.
You're
Forgive
in,
me, I can't
you're
remember the exact detail of it.
so for the benefit of the
But
audience, they have to know that Matthew is an avid listener of Talking Billions, not only a guest and a friend, but you send me pictures from the places where you listen to the podcast and sometimes even videos.
yeah, I go running around rural England listening to Bogumil and lots of other people on the podcast. So yeah,
And
that's it.
then And then one of the videos, you were crossing a river that looked like it was impossible to cross. But then when you came up closer to the river or a creek, you could walk across little rocks or something. And
Yeah,
then
well,
you
they were stepping
managed
stones.
stepping
Yeah,
stones.
stepping stones across the river, and I knew they were there because this is up in the northeast of England, and I knew these stepping stones were there. So I did a route and then came to this river. But there's been a lot of rain in the UK in the last, I don't know, months and months and months, loads of rain, more than normal. The Brits are talking about the weather even more because it's been very wet. And I came to this, I don't know, big stream, small river, knowing that the stepping stones were there. And yeah, they were completely covered in about, I don't know, this much water over the top
Uh-huh.
of them. So I thought, okay, I'll just have to carry on, get my feet wet. But I thought I'd video it. So that got tweeted out.
Matthew, when I saw that river, I thought of life in general, because life feels sometimes like that river. You get to a point that's impossible to cross. But if you come up closer to the obstacle, you actually realize there's some stepping stones. And you might not know what the next one is in life, but you kind of figure out. And you go to the next one and to the next one and to the next one. So
That's
you brought
very
up
true.
a lot of little stories that I mentioned in the
Anyway,
podcast.
yes. So I would like to hear much more about the Poland part, and then
So
maybe a bit about the French part, and we can get all that. But a bit more detail on perhaps, the first decade of your life.
So first decade was very different than the rest of my life. I was born in
Good.
1980, and it was the last decade of an economic experiment in Poland. People call it communism. I think that's what it was. So there was no suspended free market and suspended private ownership of businesses and everything else. The government owned everything, and there was just one party and limited freedoms in general. But as a kid growing up, I realized that we all grow up in our little universe and we think that that's the whole world. The whole world works this way. And I remember walks with my grandpa to pick up ration cards. They're not food stamps like in the US, but everybody was getting a ration card in all of the country because there was a shortage of certain products.
This is
And
so yes, the products were literally rationed, so you could only have a certain amount of certain products.
and that happened in the past during the war or after the war. I think even the UK had periods like
Oh, in
that
the
and
UK
different.
it did until I don't know, maybe the 50s, early 50s. Yeah.
So this was 1980s Poland, and the products that were rationed were meat, and Poland is full of meat and pork definitely, and then flour was also rationed, and there's no shortage of flour in Poland. Just the mismanagement of the economy under that system was so bad that there were shortages of those products. Now there was
Right.
a gray market, so you could buy things from the farmers directly. So it wasn't the case that people were starving. I'm sure some people were, but an average citizen could find food with the money they earned. But the government-owned stores were so inefficient that there were shortages of products and there were lines outside. Even if you had a ration card, even if you had cash, you wouldn't be
And that
able
was
to
just
buy
part
certain
of the
products.
day. Was I mean, so is this in rural Poland, or did you grow up in a
All
town or a city?
It was everywhere, pretty much the same. So I grew up
Sorry,
in
no,
in a
where you were with. So you're
it was
walking
a
with your
small
grandpa.
town. It
That
was
was
a
a small
small
town.
town. Yeah, it was a small town.
Uh-huh.
And we were walking to this castle-looking building, and Grandpa would tell me stories. And in my head, I thought all the kids in the whole world are doing the same thing every month. And for me, as a kid, you live in this fairy tale world. So you think, this is fun. Grandpa's taking me out for a walk and telling me stories about the different buildings in town. And it was a historic town with a castle and a church and so on. And to me, it was just an event of the month. So I think it took me years to understand what is it that we were actually doing. And Grandpa was a very cheerful person, storyteller and so on. So Grandpa wouldn't tell me, look, we're doing this because of the shortages and so on. And as a kid, you're completely unaware. But that stayed with me. And I think the other lesson from that time was, and I mentioned now and then, that shopping as an experience for me, going to stores just to shop for the sake of shopping, which is entertainment. I realized once I moved to the US, it's an fun, entertaining thing to do. In Poland, the stores were not fun until I turned 10. So I think by that time, certain habits are set in your personality. And when you think of, spending money on going to stores, that was not something that was fun. So by the time I was a teenager and Poland went through a massive transformation, the country opened up. The stock exchange reopened after about half a century. I think the first time it closed was when the Nazi tanks came in 1939, and until 1990, 91 or so, the stock market was shut down. There was no public market or anything like that. Hyperinflation followed, high unemployment. So they called it a shock therapy. But from my perspective, stores filled up with products that were imported. Color showed up. There were commercials and ads and everything showing up. So the country went from a scale of gray to full color. And as a kid, as a teenager, I thought this is fascinating. And I think that planted a seed for what I wanted to do in the future. I wanted to make sense of the world around me, whether it's economics or politics or finance eventually. I just wanted to understand how did this come about?
And did that come from, like, you're saying when you were a bit younger, your grandfather going for a walk with him, did he try to tell you things about the world? I mean, what did he do for a living? What did your parents do? Were they part of this, or actually was it self-discovery when you were in your teens and things were changing?
I think there were a lot of conversations in my house from all the adults about the world, and they would explain to me as soon as I could understand. So my grandfather, the one I'm talking about, he was an engineer, so he helped build a couple of plants around town. My parents are doctors, so I would spend a lot of time visiting them at the hospital. And I always thought of their job as more of a calling. You don't become a doctor because you want to. You kind of become a doctor because you have to. You have a calling to do it. And they would go out of their way to help people. So I grew up around that kind of mindset of serving people. And as an investment advisor to families these days, I feel like I'm serving them as well. And I go out of my way to help and guide beyond what the job description would say. And that's what I grew up around. I have memories of certain moments when we had the first free elections in Poland, and my parents took me, and it was a very powerful moment because they took me and they showed me that we could choose, and they explained that this is the first time that we can actually choose somebody outside of the one leading party. And it was the Lech Wałęsa time, and there was a big change and free elections, and Poland was really going through a massive transformation. So I remember that it was a part of the conversation. And then for me, the big eye-opening moment was a trip outside of Poland. So we would go to the Czech Republic now and then, but it was very similar to Poland at the time. But we went to Vienna, Austria.
Ah, wow.
And Vienna blew my mind.
And this is now after this is in the 90s.
So it's about the moment that things were changing. It was 88, 89, 90. And
because was travel very restricted before that? Like, did your parents leave to go to Vienna beforehand, or was it simply not allowed?
And that's a great question. So until 89, 90, the travel was very restricted in the sense that the country, Poland, would not give you a passport to leave. You had to petition, and it was a whole process. Like these days, if you want a passport in the UK or in the US or even in Poland, you just go and get it. You don't explain why. And then once you got the passport, you needed a visa to go everywhere, including Germany and France. And so there were two parts to it to make it work, which was tricky. So, and
what about within the Soviet Union? So could you have gone to, I don't know, East Germany, which I'm still old enough to remember, East and West Germany, East and West Berlin.
You remember that?
Escaping. I'm older than you are. And so could you travel within the Soviet Union or not?
So it's going to surprise you maybe, but there were two different passports. There was a passport for the Soviet bloc and there was a passport for the rest of the world. There were two different passports. So you could petition for the one to travel within the Soviet bloc. Soviet bloc meaning Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Yugoslavia was kind of in between, but Romania, Bulgaria, and obviously all the Soviet Union republics. To go to the Soviet Union, it was a bit tricky. You had to be invited, and they were just controlling who will come and see, so you couldn't travel. But you could go to the Czechoslovakia at the time. You could go see Prague and walk around before all the tourists discovered Prague. But so there was a massive change, and it was happening so quickly, and the country was opening up so quickly. So whenever we had the first moment, we went to see Vienna, and I saw those big, supermarkets full of products. And you're gonna laugh, but banana was something that wasn't available in Poland, because banana is actually very tricky to sell. As an investor later on, I invested in some banana producers and learned more about the banana world. But it's an imported good with dollars. There was a shortage of dollars in Poland. That's first thing. And then you need to have warehouses to store it properly so it doesn't go bad and so on. So there were no bananas in Poland. So
it just wasn't worth it to do that.
People would bring one banana at a time, and through some channels of people working on big ships bringing in things, and they would bring a few bananas. So I saw a banana.
Right.
I didn't know I was missing out. There were apples, pears, plums, you name it. So I didn't feel like I was missing out. But walking into a store in Vienna and seeing piles and piles of bananas, and banana in some parts of the world these days is cheaper than an apple, especially some parts of the year when one is out of season. So to me, to see bananas was just mesmerizing. So all those things are, little memories. And sometimes when I repeat them, I kind of don't even believe that it's my story. You know how it is? Because it's so distant, and
it's like
it's
a
so
different
fun.
life. It's like a different person, really.
It was a different life.
Universe. Yeah.
Different universe.
But I think that's lovely, because often, and it's very interesting, and you do it on your podcast and others that I listen to. Sometimes people ask for, early childhood memories, and often, they're quite traumatic, right? Something bad happens. People lose parents, or all sorts of illnesses, or all these sorts of bad things that happen. But I mean, one thing that I wanted to ask you, which you've kind of covered anyway, but I think a good question to ask is, what is your earliest? People say, what's your earliest memory? And sometimes it's quite traumatic. But I think a good question is, what is your earliest happy memory?
Mm-hmm.
And I think
that's
sometimes
a great question.
that can kind of like throw people, and because I remember my earliest memory, and it was traumatic. I was, I was pushed off a trailer on the farm, right? Or I think before that I cut my thumb with an axe. Anyway, and that's all very, very bad stuff. But then I was sort of reflecting, and I was sort of thinking, okay, what's your earliest happy memory? Because I think that's a nice thing to ponder. So tell us that.
Yeah, I'm thinking, and it's interesting when you have memories, it's very hard to chronologically organize them and say this was before that. But working my way back, what comes to mind, there was a time when my parents started working as doctors at a small hospital, and the government would provide housing to nurses and doctors. It was one building, two buildings, I don't remember, but I remember when my parents were moving in, and it was a bare apartment. Some older doctor just moved out, and I was sitting on the floor. I remember that floor, and there were pieces of wood, and my dad was doing some little finishings on the walls to cover some parts with pieces of wood for decoration. And the odd parts were on the floor, and I was playing with them and building things out of them. You could click them somehow into bigger parts. And I remember sitting on the floor doing that. And then I was trying to figure out, when did that happen? And I must have been 2-3 years old. And that's the memory that I have. But I was excited that, it's a new home and we're doing things. And I thought I'm participating in decorating the house.
Yeah, helping your dad decorate the place. Yeah, absolutely.
So I have that memory. And then I asked, when did that happen? And I must have been 2 or 3. So I have that memory.
That's great. But, and then a little bit later, bananas in Vienna. Sorry, we went back and forth there.
Yeah, but all in all, I think what I have to highlight is that it was a happy childhood. The context was bizarre and strange to analyze now as an adult, but it was a happy childhood, and I never had a feeling that I'm deprived of anything. And I think that's very important when you're growing up. And, I know kids that grew up with a lot more, but I think when you compare yourself with other people, you can create a lot of friction in your experience, and you realize, I don't have something, or I have something, and I didn't feel like I didn't have anything. I thought that my life was full. We were going on walks in the woods, and I was exploring the town with my grandpa, and I heard different stories, and I was helping in the garden with the other grandparents. I remember it as a very full, happy childhood, and the world around me was changing, and then I realized the rest of the world works very differently than whatever I'm surrounded by. But
And do you
certain
think it
habits,
helps? Sorry, I was going to say, do you think it helps that? Again, I don't want to do the pop psychology bit, but like your parent, you said before your parents had the calling to being doctors, being medics. Do you think it's
definitely.
helped? Do you think it's helpful that they had that purpose? So therefore, because it's always relative, right? There's always going to be somebody wealthier than you. There's always going to be somebody poorer than you. But if
Hmm.
you focus on that, it doesn't really help because it doesn't really satisfy you. But it doesn't
Hmm.
sound like you were focused on that. You were just had a nice, happy childhood, in the countryside, grandparent around, and all that sort of stuff. And I wonder, sometimes those sorts of relative comparison to other people, it's not on someone's radar
Hmm.
if they have a sort of a greater purpose, because that's the number one rather than comparing. And it just struck me that actually, although you were very similar to lots of other people growing up there, what your parents did was maybe different. If they were, I don't know, they wanted to be in business or they wanted to be doing other things but couldn't,
Hmm.
then it could have been quite different.
That's possibly true. Yes. There were teachers in my family. My other grandma was an accountant, and later in her life, she took over a senior citizen home that was failing, and she took it over. She rebuilt it, and then she ended up building a new one, completely new one next to it. And in Poland, you could retire relatively early still at the time, especially women could. But she worked way into what was the official retirement age redoing this house, and it was her true calling. So I grew up a lot of family members that had what you would describe as a calling, a soul in the game kind of pursuit where,
Mm.
well, there was no big money in the pursuit, but I remember her being so fulfilled, being able to provide the housing for the elderly in that house, and
Yeah.
she would get calls from them later on that she was the best manager that they ever had, and so on. So I heard all those stories of serving others, and I think it translated to the kind of work I wanted to do and help others in a way that I could and deploy the skills and the experience that I have managing money for families. And
Yeah.
you, when you think about it in life, when you go to a doctor and there's a doctor that does it only for the money, you don't really want to go to the doctor. You want to go to a doctor that does it because they have to do it. They're so passionate about it. You need to get a hip surgery or a knee surgery. You want to go to somebody that devoted their life to become the best knee surgeon there is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in many professions it really, really matters. And I had a conversation with Christian Billinger on the show about the soul in the game, pride in what you do. How when we pick stocks and managers of businesses and CEOs, but also when you pick your money manager, you want somebody that does it not just for the money. They do it because it's their calling. They have to do it. And that's how I feel about the work I do. It's my only professional passion. I wake up thinking about it and I fall asleep thinking about it. And that's what I grew up around. Whether it
It's
was,
brilliant. No, I do the same now, but it's
right?
can sometimes take a while because you kind of got to go against the grain sometimes to get that.
The reason I bring it up because there's so much attention on incentives, and Buffett brings it up. What are the incentives when you think about why people do certain things? And we think that we can sort things out with financial incentives, right? We tie the compensation to this metric on that metric on that metric. The thing is that you really want to find somebody that will do the right thing when nobody is watching.
Yes.
And that's no metric can cover it, and no manual can cover it, and no rule book can cover it. You just have to come across somebody that, in whatever pursuit it is, it's your lawyer, it's your accountant, it's your money manager, it's your doctor. They will do the right thing, even if financially it might actually not work for them.
Mm.
And if nobody's watching, they'll still do the right thing. And I think finding individuals like this, surrounding yourself with people like that, is really, a major secret to, a happy life and business success and life success. And I think we somehow understand it, but I think there's a slight denial that the financial incentives can fix it all. I don't think they can. I think you really need to.
People, because you can put it on a spreadsheet, the financial incentives, and you can map it out, and it's measurable, and there's data. To measure whether your soul is, or how much your soul is in the game, to use your phrase there, is really, really difficult. It's a judgment call, and it obviously doesn't always work out, and then people backtrack, and you can't. It's on judgment call, so you try to rationalize it with data. But the funny thing is, I remember a TED talk. I can't remember the person, but basically he was sort of saying, somebody St. John. Anyway, it's wonderful. Do it for the passion, do it for these reasons, do it for because you can't possibly not do it, and you do the right thing. You don't do it for money. And then, of course, and everybody knows this, right? If you do it for those reasons, then, if it is a lucrative thing, then the money will come, because you can't help but end up being the best at it, almost. It's kind of inevitable that it'll be successful. And maybe that's the bit that people know, but it's such a long-term game. It's a never-ending game.
But these are the only games worth playing, aren't they?
Yeah, infinite games, definitely. Okay, that's good. So let's get on to that a little bit. So we'll get towards, and we'll get up to date about what you're up to now. But that sort of makes me think, so you've seen Bananas in Vienna, you're into your teens, Poland's opening up, everyone's very, discovering these new things, and you're looking to serve people, but maybe you're not quite sure how. Sometimes I ask this of entrepreneurs as well. What did you first do to make money? What did you first do to earn money? And was that part of still being in Poland, or does that kind of take us
somewhere
to France
else
or somewhere else? And how did that go?
Well, I remember that my first real paycheck as an intern was actually in Brussels, Belgium.
Okay.
And I had this opportunity.
Were there no side hustles? Were you not in the grey market hustling when you were at school? Things like this?
So just to give you some context, there's a big difference, or there was a big difference. So in the US, I know that kids get to take in a lot of smaller roles at different fast food restaurants and make some money. That didn't really exist when I was growing up and in Poland. So I did a lot of work around the house, and we were building a little summer home in the woods when I was growing up. So things were changing quickly, and it was a very modest thing, but I spent a lot of time with a shovel and helping.
You didn't get paid for it.
No. So I have vivid memories of doing a lot of manual labor, helping around and planting trees. I actually love planting trees, and I bring up trees as a metaphor a lot in my writing and conversations. To actually plant a tree, watch it grow, and see how much time it takes for the tree to grow. I think it teaches you certain respect for time and patience that really comes in handy investing. That for a business to go from what you see, a new creation to a successful large enterprise, it's a long journey, but that's where the real value creation is, and that's where the real performance can happen. You need to give it time. And I think it would be very helpful for a lot of us to plant a tree and see how long it takes to grow. So
you can do it. It's so easy. I plant trees. So I take my son and I plant trees, and you buy them on the web here in the UK, and you get sent they're like this tall, some English oak trees that we've planted, and we just go out guerrilla style into the countryside with a shovel and plant them.
And then think of a fruit tree. Plant a fruit tree and see how until you get the first fruit. And in some cases, I understand it takes a long time to get quality olives or quality dates. We didn't plant those in Poland, but I imagine some of the fruit can take a long time. So I think it's a great lesson in patience. But so after Poland, I spent a year in Brussels as an exchange student. Poland was joining the EU. It was a very exciting time because Poland was clearly detaching from the Soviet bloc of influence and rejoining Europe in many ways. So it was a very exciting time, and I served as a volunteer advisor to two politicians in Poland at the time who were part of a body that was drafting what was meant to be an EU constitution, became one of the treaties. And so when I was in Brussels, it was just a very exciting time. And the year after, Poland joined the EU, and it was a massive celebration. I was on the bridge in Paris with students from all over. It just felt like a super exciting time. That it was an end of an era. And there was always the fear that Russia might expand all over again. And it's interesting that I'm bringing it up now, so many years later, when Russia is actually having some ambitions in the region to reclaim some parts of their former influence. But when I was in Brussels, something really meaningful happened to me. I was going on walks, and I was going to this English language bookstore in Brussels. It was a tiny little place, and I mentioned it in my TED Talk. Listeners can look it up. And one day I picked up a book there. It was One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. And I was taking courses in business, economics, finance, accounting, political science. But I couldn't really see how I can bring it all together. How would it work as a profession? Because my curiosity was taking me in so many different places, and I felt like I have to know it all to make sense of the world. But how do I use it? And all the roles felt very limiting. So you could become an accountant, or you could become, an advisor to a politician in our path. And I was looking at those different paths. And then Peter Lynch's book, One Up on Wall Street, basically says that we all should be investors. We all should own businesses, not necessarily be stock pickers, but he encouraged some stock picking as well. But what he said in the book was that stocks are small pieces of businesses. And I had those really advanced, sophisticated classes in options pricing, models, and so on. But nobody sat down with me and said, look, stocks are small pieces of businesses, and it doesn't matter if you have $1 billion or if you have $1,000. You can become an owner of, you name it, Coca-Cola, and these days Apple, Microsoft, and all those different businesses. You can become an owner, and they treat you the same way they treat the major shareholders. That's how the rules are written. They're not respected in the whole world the same way. I would love to remind people, but in big parts of the world with big public market established markets, the minority shareholder is treated fairly well. That's what I would argue. And you could be an owner in those businesses. So that really opened my eyes, and I was trying to understand how can I become an investor? How can I pursue this? And when I look back at it, it was more of an intellectual pursuit. The goal was not I have to make money or get rich. To me, it was an intellectual pursuit where I saw a way to deploy all my various curiosities in one place and make use of it, finding an investment that made sense.
And that was the discovery part, because I suppose some investors want to have an influence after they buy, and that can be an intellectually curious pursuit. But then you're saying it's more the analysis, the research, figuring out why things work and why one stock's better than another.
The fact that I can do that, so I can do the treasure hunt and find something that other people overlooked or misunderstood. The emotional part that I could buy it when other people panic really appealed to me. I had a contrarian bone, I think, in many ways. And the fact that I'm an owner of a business in the long run and I can benefit from the success of it. But Matthew, what really spoke to me is that the market or the share or the stock doesn't care who you are. It doesn't matter if you're young, if you're old, what's your gender, anything about you, the market does not care. It offers you an opportunity to become an owner of a business. And it really, really spoke to me. I was young, so I thought, it doesn't matter that I'm young. If I can figure it out and make sense of it, it will be beneficial for me in the long run, but I will have the satisfaction that I figured something out. I had a fascinating conversation not long ago with Guido Alfani, who wrote a book about the history of the rich throughout the centuries. And he brings up many stories, and I'll be brief here, and I'll recommend people to look up his episode that's going to come out by the time I think this airs. But he brings up the story of women. The women had large wealth at different points of time in medieval Europe, or in the 1500s, 1600s later on as well. And they could not always participate in business opportunities. Women were not let in to those opportunities. And when the early forms of the joint stock company appeared and early public markets appeared, it became secondary who the shareholder is. And women became owners quietly of big business ventures that were showing up at the time. And I found it fascinating because it resonated with what I learned 25 years ago. The market doesn't care who you are.
Yeah.
And it means that it's an open opportunity for almost anybody to participate. It worked for women in Florence in the 1500s. It's working nowadays, and I hope that over time even more people could become owners. It doesn't mean they have to be stock pickers, but one way or the other become owners of businesses, because that's
such a good mindset to have, because we're so used to, especially as a kid, right? You get told what to do, and you know, should do this, should do that. But to have that mindset that, yeah, does it really matter? And yeah, all these smart people with their stock portfolios, actually it doesn't really matter. You can do just the same and be curious and be just as smart and smarter. Yeah, it doesn't matter where you come from or what you do or what you look like. That really appeals. That's a great mindset.
I quickly discovered Warren Buffett, because Warren Buffett is actually mentioned in the book, Peter Lynch's book, and I didn't know who Warren Buffett was. He was to me any CEO of a large corporation. You know, as going to school, I didn't know enough. And I read more about him, and I discovered that there is somebody that was able to collect businesses throughout many, many decades, all kinds of businesses, and compound wealth. And it really spoke to me. And what you just brought up, there are a lot of people trying to do that. What really spoke to me was that when you expand your time horizon, you realize there are fewer people competing with you. So if we talk about day trading, which is of no interest to me, it's basically a coin toss if the market will close up or down for the day. Then statistically, it's a 50-50 chance. That's not a game I want to play. We spoke earlier about different games we want to play. When you expand that horizon, and when you see this as an actual ownership of a business over a long period of time, and you pay a little bit of attention to what kind of businesses you choose, the odds are improving very quickly that you will make money choosing those investments. Will you beat the market or not? That's a whole secondary decision, consideration. But owning businesses over a longer period of time is bound to create wealth for you. So that's something that really spoke to me. So it's not that I had to compete on being smarter or faster than anybody else, but more patient. And I can be patient.
No one wants to get rich slowly, as they say.
Well, there's this joke that people walk up to Munger and Buffett and ask them, how can I do what you did, just faster?
Yeah. Things are pretty efficient, right? So that is the efficient. Like, I follow Seth Godin. I know Seth Godin. He's an amazing writer and character, and he says, yeah, there are no shortcuts. Like, people are looking for the shortcut, and that person, they joke about the person who asks Buffett and Munger that they want to do it, they do it. Well, Buffett and Munger are doing it the quickest way. That is the shortcut, but it is the one with the long time horizon. Because if you want a shorter one, yeah, you can go day trade, but that's not going to get you what they've got.
No. But
very good. So that was in Brussels. And that was sort of your first taste of work. Was that in amongst university? Or did you go after that?
So the role itself, you mean the job? So it was.
He said it was an internship, so that makes me think it was in between years.
Yes, so it was in between, and it was Bosch. Bosch was making windshield wipers outside of Brussels in a small town, and it was a role with their accounting department. Not a very exciting place, some fun people that I met there, but I got to see a small manufacturing plant and the two sides of it where people were going in to work on the assembly line, and a couple of accountants and operations people in a small building next to it outside of Brussels. So that's what I did, and they gave me a real official paper check as a payment for the time spent, and it was very empowering. I thought, wow.
Fantastic. What did you spend it on? Did you spend it? Did you blow it all, or did you save some of it and spend some of it?
I wish I had a story. I don't remember. I felt like it was almost, I felt like I can't spend it because I should just frame that check, and it probably helped me with the daily expenses in Brussels. I don't think it was anything. Yeah. But it was just the feeling that it has my name on it and it's a paycheck and I got paid for the work I did. I think it was very, very empowering to feel that somebody valued my time.
Amazing. And then, so take us through the next few years.
Well, after Brussels, after a short stop back in Warsaw to finish my school in Warsaw, I finished Warsaw School of Economics, which is a highly regarded school in Poland with a long history, and a lot of major politicians and CEOs went to that school. So had I stayed in Poland, that name would have opened a lot more doors, but I didn't want to go easy on myself, so I ended up moving out of Poland, and I went to Paris, where it was my grad school, Sciences Po in Paris, and it was a balance between political science courses and business courses. The school was going from massive transformation, opening up to a lot of international students at the time, but also inviting a lot of former graduates to come back and teach. And these graduates would come from the business world. They were investment bankers, they were marketing people, they came from all over, and venture capital, and they would teach courses. So I had old school professors teaching political science and the history of democracy, and then I would go to another class where I would have real case studies about, actually we're talking about Apple and the transformation of Apple at the time. It was the year 2003, 2004, 2005. Yeah. A long time ago. Now it feels like a long time ago, but
it doesn't. Okay. Let's gloss over that bit.
Yeah, I keep correcting myself what year that was. But anyways, I felt like I got a glimpse of the real business world at that school. Right. And I went from memorizing things to actually solving problems. And you and I spoke about quality of questions, and I feel like that time gave me a great experience in improving my quality of questions. And you know how I feel about memorizing data. I feel like you can always look up things, but when you're in the room, asking the right question really changes the dynamic. And in the investment world, or in the work that I do, it really matters to be able to ask the right question. I keep on thinking how I can continue to improve my quality of questions. I had Milo Jones on the show, who did research about the CIA and the quality of questions, and he has some fascinating takes about it. In the world ahead of us, with AI being able to look up things for us very quickly, we're not going to be faster than any machine in looking up the names of Napoleon's officers in this battle or that battle, which was something I was quizzed about at some point when I studied history. What will add value is the questions that you asked, and that school, I think, really provided that kind of preparation. But I already set my mind on New York after reading Peter Lynch. I had this big audacious dream of working in the investment world. So,
because I was wondering what the typical, your classmates in Paris then, what was the kind of typical or expected route for them?
It was actually, the range was getting broader and broader. So originally, Sciences Po was the school that would mint the future presidents of the French Republic and the CEOs of the major corporations in France as well. But outside of that, the school was opening up in the sense that there were more business courses and even some legal courses, law. And so it was really expanding. And my friends were going to everything from nonprofits in the UN all the way to investment banking. So it was a wider and wider range. And I was intrigued by investment banking mostly because it was very competitive, and people thought that if you could get that kind of an opportunity, it opens all the doors. So you'll laugh, but I actually applied for an investment banking opportunity with two investment banks, Lazard and Rothschild in Paris. And
very good.
And they both said yes. And
oh wow, okay.
And I didn't go to either. I didn't because an opportunity.
That is their loss.
Yes, the opportunity appeared to go to New York and have an internship at a real investment firm, value oriented.
And did people think you were crazy? Like, you've got this offer from Lazard, Rothschilds. Did your fellow students think, hey, you could go there, you could earn a ton of money?
Probably.
Did your parents think you were nuts? Did they understand? And was it? And how instinctive was it to go to New York? I mean, it sounds like it was influenced by the book, but
well, it's so many layers to it. I think I wanted to go through the process of getting an investment banking internship just to see what it's like and learn what it's like. And it's a story in itself. But at one of those banks, I had a conversation where I sat down with somebody that was only 2 years older than me, and he just gave me a talk. He said, from your application and the conversations you're having so far, it looks like you will get it. You will get this opportunity. He looked very tired. He looked exhausted. It looked like he didn't sleep for a few days. And he said, you're going to learn a lot, but this is a really unpleasant experience, and you're not going to like yourself. You're going to miss all the holidays, miss all the weekends, but it is what you get, and I think you should know that. And it's not, I think he just wanted me to know what it's like. There are legends and stories, there are books written. I think there's a book called Monkey Business that talks about investment banking as a job. Yeah. But I think what he wanted to say is that he wished he knew or had known what it's like, and he wanted me to know what it's like. And it really made a big impression on me in that moment. And I knew that I want to go to the investment management side of the business, but maybe that conversation made me think, I don't know if I want to spend a few years in that kind of environment. And I have a lot of respect for people that do that, and I know they learn a lot in that environment, but I didn't know it's for me, especially that I knew already what I want to do. I wouldn't spend those years discovering what I want to do. I knew I want to go to the investment management world, and the timing was just perfect that an opportunity appeared, and I ended up going to New York instead. I think the pay at the beginning was much better with the investment banking role than with mine. But again, it was really secondary to me. That's why I emphasized, financial incentives are just a small part of the equation. I just knew what I want to do, and I want to sit, look at a stock, analyze it, and have a room of people rip it apart and tell me why I'm wrong. And I wanted to learn through that kind of an experience. And it soon happened. Within months of me showing up in New York, I was sitting in a room, not the first and not the last time in my life, where I was the only person not born in the US sitting at that big, big table, pitching a stock of an American company to an all-American room, and thinking to myself, who am I here to do this? I wasn't even born in this country. And you brought it up briefly in the early conversation today, how in Paris there was a moment when the students elected me to a student body that represented all the students, and we were in meetings with the board of the school, the professors, and some of the older alumni, and I was the only non-French student in that room, telling them how to run the school based on the input I had from other students, what should be changed. And I found myself, again, as an outsider in a room. And in the moment, I didn't think of it as a big deal. Now I look at it and I feel like I get myself in those situations where the outsider perspective, leveraged the right way, can actually allow me to see things that maybe the others in the room don't see. And I think that's a hugely valuable thing to have in many pursuits, but especially in investing. You have to see things differently. Otherwise, you'll make the same mistakes as everybody else.
You do, but I mean, it's a great attribute to have, and to have the confidence in it that you have. I mean, obviously you're a good student and you're smart, but to have that confidence in that, maybe it's not always there, but you've got to remind yourself and get it, because you never know when that's going to pay off, right? I think people in the investment banking world that you nearly went to, they are so driven by spreadsheets and everything, analysis, over analysis. They think they know what's going to pay off and when. But in what you're doing, what you ended up doing, yes, of course there's analysis, but it's a different kind, and you've got to see things differently. Whereas in the investment banks, everybody tries to see things the same.
It's much more nuanced, and I've been in the business managing money for families, wealthy individuals for 2 decades, and I noticed how I got lured into the industry because I was fascinated on the intellectual level about finding investment ideas. But once I appeared in this field, I realized it really matters whose money you're managing. And it's such a valuable part of the experience. And I grew to appreciate it, that knowing exactly the people, the individuals, the faces, the names, the stories behind the accounts that I manage, it added meaning and fulfillment and this importance to what I do. It's not just picking stocks that go up over time, which is nice to see and nice to have, and not all of them go up, of course. But knowing what kind of a difference that pursuit makes in people's lives.
Okay.
And
So going back to what you were saying earlier, then you say it doesn't matter who you are, you still own the same stock that everyone else owns, but it still mattered to you who that person was behind the stock.
Exactly. So it matters to me as an advisor, right? So I'm serving people the same way my grandmother was making sure that the elderly had a place to stay, and my parents had patients they took care of, sometimes on weekends, dropping me off and running to take care of somebody. And I always thought that, they have this higher calling. In my line of work, it matters whose money I manage. To me, it matters. So that I can serve them better, and I know what kind of an important role I play in their life managing their money. So to me, it matters. For the stock, it's secondary if I pick the stock or somebody picked the stock or who owns it. That's true. But for me as an advisor, the same as a doctor, the doctor wants to know who you are. And I think as a patient or as a client, you want to know that the other side truly cares. Even if the doctor has all the software and the apps and the screens and does the analysis and gets the x-ray in 5 seconds and so on, you want somebody to hold your hand and say, Matthew, this is exactly what we need to do today. And that's how I feel about money and managing somebody's wealth. I want them to know that I'm here, and I tell them I'm always here, and I can hold their hand, especially in times when it's a really difficult and trying time, when the markets sell off, or if there are any family dynamics happening, where I can help and be that voice and the presence and give them the attention when they need it. That's something I want from my doctor, and that's something I want to provide as an advisor.
Very good. Very good. So let's bring things a little more up to date. So that was your first role in New York. Did you work for many other firms after that?
So I spent 11 years with the same firm, which grew substantially over time. They made me a partner relatively early, and I managed a fund over there, and I built some client base over there. And then after 11 years, I left the firm with a few partners that I worked with at the time, and we co-founded another firm where I stayed for 8 years. And it was a fascinating experience of going from being, even a partner, but an employee of a firm, and being responsible for many more roles and many more functions when it comes to running a business. It was really eye-opening. And I think of Buffett when he says, being a businessman makes me a better investor, and being an investor makes me a better businessman. I think it was hugely valuable for me to see the inner workings of the operations of an actual business, the profit and loss, and what costs how much.
You set that up, you set that up from scratch with a few other people. Is that right?
Yes. That was 8 years ago, and we had the opportunity to kind of choose and pick the different building blocks. And about a month ago, so in 2024 now, when we're speaking, I decided to launch my own investment firm, and it's yet another chapter for me. And you, as somebody who has so much experience with people that are starting businesses, we already spoke about it, how it's a very humbling pursuit, but it's also a blank canvas for you to build exactly something that you want, the way you want it, with the pieces that you like and the clients that you enjoy and so on. So it's a fascinating way of transitioning and expanding my understanding from just managing investments, being part of a business, and actually launching a business from scratch and seeing how all of those pieces coexist and work together. So I think...
and has anything surprised you with that, or have you surprised yourself in that process?
I think it's a great learning experience on many levels. I think I'm very impressed with how much innovation there has been in many different, service providers and solutions and software. When you have an established firm, it's very hard to transition from one platform to the other over time. So starting something from scratch, I think it gave me an open mandate to try different new things. Some of them came up only in the last 2-3 years. Some of them are AI powered. A lot of them are fairly much more sophisticated than anything I've ever seen. And in some cases, it's funny, speaking of quality of questions, I called up one service provider, and apparently my questions were so good, and they were very innocent. I just wanted to understand how it works, that within minutes they put on the line on the phone the CEO and the founder of the firm, and they said, given the questions you're asking, you should talk to Jim. And there I had the CEO of the service provider, the new app, on the phone telling me the new features that are being rolled out. So it's a fun experience for me to see what can I do to serve my clients even better, and what can I do to free up even more time to be able to serve them better and build it all really, piece by piece in the best way possible. So it's been a really fun experience.
Oh no, that's fantastic. And are you up and running then? Can you share the name?
Yes.
Do you have a website and all that kind of stuff, or is it still a bit stealthy?
It's a bit of both. So the name is Blue Infinitas Capital, and I'll tell you more about the name. The website is ready, but it's not live. So by the time this episode goes live, hopefully the website is live.
Yeah.
Let me explain the name. So for me, blue, because of a blue horizon, open opportunity, I sail and I fly planes. And I always think of the blue horizon, open horizon as the open-ended opportunity of the investment pursuit or family wealth, the way I look at it. Now, infinitas is a Latin word. It means infinity. And to me, the infinite investment horizon, and I bring up a lot in my conversations and writing, is the horizon that families that I work with have. They think of wealth as not something that they have to, double or triple within a year or two. It's something that they can grow over a long, long period of time. Hence the infinite, open-ended opportunity. And I use the Latin word as a bit of a play on the fact that it's a dead language. So it connects me back to the past. When you think of a family fortune, you see it today, but you see the past. This fortune is around here with us today because somebody created that fortune, because people cared for it for so many years. And then you have this open-ended future infinite horizon ahead of you. So I like this play that, look, it's a dead language, so it's the past, but it describes the future that's not here yet. So that's the name.
It's very fitting. And that sort of brings me back to where I wanted to go with the conversation as well, is to loop it back. So I'm very grateful for you explaining all of that, because I had some questions after we spoke, and I was like, I wonder what the background to this guy is. He grew up and he's got this name and this accent, and he talks about France and all this sort of stuff. So it's been a real pleasure to be able to ask you these questions. So thank you for that. But again, kind of looping it back to the past, I guess my kind of final point is to think back to the young Bogumil. Would he recognize you now? Would he be surprised? Is there anything that you'd want to tell him?
I actually wrote an article, a message to a younger self, and it got inspired by wealth letters that Jordan Olmscheid is collecting. He's also writing a book, and you might know his name. He came up in the podcast a couple of times. And I like this exercise, and I'll talk about the future self in a moment, but if you had a chance to write a message to your younger self, and in the article that I wrote a few months ago, I said that everything will be all right. It's the river that you were trying to cross on your hike, on your run, and you walk up to the river and you don't see a way. When I saw your video, I thought, I don't see the way until I noticed there are stepping stones. Like in life, there are stepping stones. You just have to take the first step. But then I thought to myself, had I said everything is going to be all right, would that mean that I would try a little less hard? Would I not make the extra phone call? Would I not send the extra application? Would I not stay the extra hour? I don't know. So it's a funny experience, because on one hand, you want to give comfort to the younger self and say, whatever you're worried about at this moment, it's going to fade away and not really matter in the long run. On the other hand, you want to leave that kind of appetite and a slight discomfort that you do have to try a bit harder because somebody else might be trying a bit harder. And that's worth it. So it's a nice balance between saying, yes, it will be all right, but keep at it, okay?
Work hard regardless. It'll be all right because you work damn hard. And you do the right thing even when no one's watching. That's definitely paid off for you.
But the other side of it, the future self. And Hal Hirschfield has a wonderful book, The Future Self, that I highly recommend. I brought it up in the podcast a few times, and I had a few conversations about it with a number of people. it's such a tricky experiment, mental experiment for us to imagine a future self, because we can't see that person, we can't really feel that person. In the book, he actually suggests that we're not the same person, which is something that I can relate to, because I feel like different chapters of my life are different people. I remember that, but it's not really me. In many ways, it's not. So one of the exercises that they do is that they age your photo, and they show you yourself of, I don't know, 75 or 85. And then the minute you actually see yourself as an older person, it becomes more real, and you start to think, what would I like to do today for that future self? And it's hard enough for your own future self. I think it's even harder for kids or nephews and nieces if you want to leave something for them, and you think of, I have this family fortune, how would I like this fortune to serve the next generation? And in some cases, the families I've worked with, they've had wealth over 4, 5, 6 and more generations. That's a long, long time, way beyond the 100-year investment horizon that some of the families have. And to think of that future self, you yourself or the other beings in your life, what is it that I can do for them that would be meaningful, important, and so on? It's a really interesting exercise. And we spoke about patience and long-term games. If you have, the longer the game is, the fewer competitors you really have. And then you realize you're actually in a game where you're up against just yourself. And in many pursuits in life, including investing, it's just you that you're dealing with. And I think in a way it's very empowering when you realize the only competition I have is whatever story I'm telling myself that's not helping me. How can I rewrite that story? And how I can think in a bigger way with an infinite investment horizon and an infinite perspective.
Excellent. Well, we will see that unfold with the new firm. I hope you'll still be doing Talking Billions podcasts.
Yes.
And having many more interesting conversations. But that's been fantastic today. That's all I have to ask you.
No, I love it. I love it. It was a pleasure. You brought up the podcast, so I'll say a few words, but the podcast has been such a wonderful experience for me to sit down with old friends and new friends and people that became friends since, including you. And it's such a wonderful hour that creates this opportunity for us to talk about things that matter to both of us and have this truly intimate conversation. And for the audience, I think it's a chance to get to know the people that I care about, that are important to me, that I learn from, that I respect, in a way that I see them or I experience them. I want the audience to see Matthew the way I know Matthew. And I think that's the overarching goal for the podcast. And it's so fun when I feel like this was Matthew in the episode. And, I get those emails from people that have been on so many podcasts, and they say, you know what? There was something that happened during this conversation. I felt like it was like the real me. I could tell my real story, and you let me tell my real story. And it's very touching. I really appreciate those emails after the recording.
That's amongst the best compliments you can get. I mean, that's fantastic. And that doesn't surprise me. So stick with it.
I've been loving the experience. But Matthew, thank you so much for today, taking both of us on this journey for time and talking about the different stepping stones across that big river that life can be, and taking one leap, one step at a time. I think that's the secret, and keep at it.
My pleasure. It's been fun. Thanks for being so open, candid, and honest. Been great.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Matthew.